What's up, guys? Matty here, mixandmastermysong.com. Today we're going to be checking out this new plugin from Empirical Labs called Big FrEQ or Big FrEQ. Not quite sure what they're going with, but I think let's call it Big FrEQ for now. Pretty cool plugin. Let's check it out. All right, guys, here is the plugin, the Big FrEQ. It is actually sort of a hardware emulation of the Little FrEQ, which is a hardware unit that Empirical Labs has. It's been around for a while. Some of my friends have it and love this EQ. This one, from what I understand, expands upon that a bit, and it has a few more features that one doesn't necessarily have. So let's run through the features, and then we'll take listen to some examples. So it has a high pass, low shelf, low pass, and a high shelf here, which is great. Phase button, which I always love having on EQ. Your general output, which is here. This finisher, which is really one of the cooler added features of the unit, is some saturation that can be used just to push it a little bit harder, and it can go really all the way there, and it sounds really good. Oversample, which I always love having, especially when you have a saturation. Having the ability to oversample can make saturation sound even better. And then you got 6 different bands here, and the bands are really cool because you can go, here's your cue, right? You have different slopes, which is always helpful. And then you have your frequency here, and then your gain here. Now, the cool thing about this EQ, which I really dig, is it's set, at default, it's usually set to a full spectrum frequency here on your frequency picker, 20 hertz to 20K. But you can click this button here, which I assume stands for focus, okay? And that will fine tune the frequency to a smaller band, 1K to 4K in this instance. If you go here, it's 499 to 1K. Here, it's 99 to 3K. And you can do finer frequency scoops, which we'll check out in a minute, depending on where you're trying to focus on. So I guess focus is a good word for it. Also has a solo mode, so if you're searching for a certain frequency that you want to cut or boost, you can solo it, which is always a great feature on EQs. And then it has this here where, let's see what they call it, select 15 or 30 band range. So it's a different different ranges, which is always great too if you're maybe using it for something in mastering where you want a little less, you just want to go up a dB or something, or you can switch to the 30 band if you really want to crank something, which, man, I haven't used 30 dB of gain on an EQ, I don't think ever, but hey, never say never with mixing. Okay, so let's check this out. This is a song by my buddy Rhea, Overdose, if you want to check it out on SoundFlow. And we just got her vocal here, bare dry, no plugins on it. I took off everything I used in the mix. And let's check it out, and we'll kind of show you what this thing can do.
It's been a couple weeks since we met in the West Side. I went to your room.
So one of the first things I hear with this vocal is we want to get, there's a little bit of like mud around either 250, 500 hertz. So the first thing we could do is solo this, right? Go into this, the tighter focus mode, and now this will get us in that ballpark of where we want to be. And let's do a real tight cue and see if we can find where some of that frequencies that we don't want are there.
Been a couple weeks since we met in the West Side. I went to your room. Now you're overthinking, trying to figure out what you're supposed to do. Been a couple weeks since we met in the West Side. I went to your room. Now you're overthinking, trying to figure out what you're supposed to do. Been a couple weeks since we met in the West Side. I went to your room. Now you're overthinking. Been a couple weeks since we met in the West Side. I went to your room. Now you're overthinking. Been a couple weeks since.
Let's take that out. We'll take that out, and then we're going to focus here. We want to take a little bit of that 800 out too. That doesn't sound so good there. So we can turn this band on.
Been a couple weeks since We met in the West Side, I went to your room. Now you're overthinking, trying to figure out what you're supposed to do.
And let's turn the shelf on and maybe just bring this down because it's not quite getting rid of that nasaliness that I'm not digging.
Been a couple weeks since we met in the West Side, I went to your room. Now you're overthinking. Been a couple weeks since we met in the West Side, I went to your room. Now you're overthinking. Been a couple weeks since. Been a couple weeks since we met in the West Side, I went to your room.
Nice, so now we seem to have cleared that up, and that did a great job of doing this. Then we can add a touch of air here.
Been a couple weeks since we met in the West Side, I went to your room.
And then let's take this and see if there's some of that little mid-range that we're not digging. Take that out.
Been a couple weeks since we met in the West Side, I went to your room. Now you're overthinking, trying to figure out what you're supposed to do. Been a couple weeks since we met in the West Side, I went to your room. Now you're
Let's see, which one is this? That's that one.
been a couple weeks since we met in the West Side, I went to your room. Now you're overthinking, trying to figure out what you're supposed to do. Been a couple weeks since we met in the West Side, I went to your room. Now you're overthinking. Been a couple weeks since. Been a couple weeks since we met.
It sounded good. Then we'll just do a high pass around 80 just to get rid of any sort of rumble.
Been a couple weeks since we met in the West Side, I went to your room. Now you're overthinking, trying to figure.
Add a low pass just to carve off some of that super high we're not going to need. Then we could boost our high end a touch more.
Been a couple weeks since we met in the West Side, I went to your room. Now you're overthinking, trying to figure out what you're supposed to do.
Sounds pretty good. And then, let's check out the finisher. Let's see if we can add this. Now, it can be super subtle or all the way to super driven, which is cool about it.
Been a couple weeks since we met in the West Side, I went to your room. Now you're overthinking. Been a couple weeks since we met in the West Side, I went to your room. Now you're overthinking.
And the saturator is great because it has a little bit of compression, which saturation can do, but also helps take down some of that high end if we got a little too harsh, warming things up a bit. I really like the finisher a lot. I'm going to crank it all the way so you guys can hear what it can really do.
Been a couple weeks since we met in the West Side, I went to your room. Now you're overthinking, trying to figure out what you're supposed to do. Been a couple weeks since we met in the West Side, I went to your room. Now you're overthinking.
So there you have it. Pretty impressive what you can do with this EQ, and the saturation really adds to it quite a bit. I do have other plugins that do a lot of this already. I use a Nectar a lot by Isotope that I can do this with. Fab Filter, of course, but this brings something else to the table. It's kind of fun to use. It's a little something different, and it's always good to have a couple different EQs that you really dig that can work for you to do exactly what you want them to do. The finisher is icing on the cake for it. I really dig that part. What would be cool is maybe in the next version, maybe they can add dynamic EQ, which would be pretty cool. And I'd love to know like Empirical Labs' take on that because they're so good at doing compression as well. But overall, super, super great plugin. I'm going to be using it quite a bit, I'm sure, along with some of my other favorites. And EQs are always weird for me. It's hard to know if it'll really become a part of my daily use until I've used it for a month or so. And then it's like, oh, that's the EQ I want. Because usually I'm only using a handful of EQs every day when I'm mixing. But really, really dig this plugin. Give it an A+. Going to be trying to use it some more. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you need your songs mixed and mastered, hit me up at mixandmastermysong.com. You can also check out my courses and presets there too. Talk to you soon.